Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to test something real quick with you to make sure the correct screen opens for
Okay.
Vajira's talk. Um,
Oh, did you get another monitor?
I've had one,
Oh, okay.
and normally I just use Google Slides and it's fine, but whenever I use PowerPoint, it opens like two
Mm,
things.
yeah. And you can close the other one because I did that by accident. But
Okay,
then
how do
you
you do
just
that?
lose your spot. Um,
Okay, how do you like pause? I don't know
so
how to
if
close
you
the
want to
one.
switch your screens,
Yeah,
there's up at the top. Yeah.
like I see so I can definitely swap displays, but yeah, I can't. Oh, here we go. That was dumb. Okay, so like if like that looks normal,
So you don't want to do it in the Google Slides?
it won't work because he
It won't
recorded
work.
it.
I see. Okay.
But do you see it at
Yes, I
least?
do.
Okay,
Yep.
cool.
Perfect.
Okay, then that is not an issue. Great.
All right.
I will be doing the other one in Google Slides.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon and good evening. We are a few minutes away from the top of the hour. We'll just wait for our attendees to arrive, and then we will get started. Thank you for joining.
Morning, Teji.
Good morning, Jeff.
We'll be getting started.
Jeff, I think your bandwidth is a little bit low. We should be getting started soon when Dr. Ginsberg rejoins our group. It is a few minutes past the hour. We'll
There's
just
nothing
give
I
it a
can
few more.
do to change that.
Okay. We will start 5 minutes after the hour.
I just want to check to see that our I'm just checking to see that keynote speakers arrived.
I do not see Dr. Dissanayake on yet. He has provided a video of his presentation because of his bandwidth. Just to make sure that
Teji,
it
can you
goes
hear me?
smoothly. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, now you're breaking up a little bit.
All right. So let's get started. I hope you can hear me. Welcome everybody. This is Jeff Ginsberg, and I'm here on behalf of my co-chairs. Well, Teji, you'll additional bandwidth. I'll try to take my
Yes, it's much better now
video
that you're not
off and see
showing
if-
your video. Oh, well, it was.
Can you hear me okay?
Now we can.
Welcome everybody to this working group. Our collaborative met was last May, which is about 9 months. Okay, I'll start again and say it's my pleasure to welcome everybody to this working group report out of the G2MC. We met 9 months ago in May. And
I'm sorry, Jeff, you still have some audio issues.
That time.
We can't hear you.
Today we'll hear from 6 work teams.
Chief, we cannot hear you.
Yes, I understand that. Is this any better?
It is now. It cuts in and out.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, I just don't have internet at my home, so this is the best I can do. So if you can hear me, let me know. Otherwise, maybe I'll turn it over to Teji to introduce the session.
You're actually fine now. It cuts in and out. But I'm happy to
Okay.
go ahead and introduce the session if you would like, Jeff.
Let me try it one more time, and I apologize. So today we're going to hear from 6 work teams: the education work team, young investigators, rare disease, family history, evidence, and pharmacogenomics. We've also had an active group that has been preparing a charter for the G2MC, and I'm very happy to say that the final charter will be ratified very soon. I wanted to show the vision for the G2MC, if you can bring up the next slide. Keep going. So this is the vision for the G2MC, realizing the full potential of genomic medicine worldwide to improve individual and population health. And our mission is to identify barriers and solutions, to lead and develop programs, and to leverage worldwide expertise that brings genomic medicine to low resource settings globally through educational programs, policy, influence, and implementation science. And it's with that vision and mission in mind that it's really appropriate for us to have today's keynote address from Vajira Dissanayake, who will, with a focus on low resource settings and low and middle income countries. Professor Dissanayake is the Dean of the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Colombo in Sri Lanka. He is also the Chair and Senior Professor of Anatomy, the Director of the Human Genetics Unit, and the Chair of the Specialty Board in Biomedical Informatics at the university. He has held medical leadership positions locally and internationally. He was the president of the Sri Lanka Medical Association in 2012 and the president of the Commonwealth Medical Association in 2016. He has over 20 years experience in the fields of genetics, genomics, biomedical informatics, and he was elected as a fellow at the National Academy of Sciences in Sri Lanka in 2013 in recognition of his outstanding contributions to the field of medicine. He was awarded the national titular honor of Vidya Yoti by His Excellency the President for his outstanding scientific and technological achievements in 2019. He is a member of the board of directors of the G2MC and a co-chair of our educational and rare diseases working groups. The title of Dr. Dissanayake's talk is Overcoming Challenges and Implementing Genomic Medicine in Low and Middle Income Countries, a Personal Perspective from Sri Lanka. Welcome, Vajira.
Thank you, Jeff. Pleasure.
As we prepare to see Dr. Dissanayake's talk, let's hold questions for the end. And also, if you'd like to put them in chat, we will capture them and have our Q&A at the end of his presentation. Thank you.
Just 1 second, sorry.
Okay.
Can you hear this or is it not playing sound?
We can hear you,
There's
but
no
not,
sound yet.
not the
Okay.
sound.
All right, 1 second. This worked earlier, so I'm not sure.
Me to talk to you today. It is indeed a
Can you hear it?
pleasure for me to share with you my experience of having implemented genomic medicine in Sri Lanka, a low middle income country setting. I hope that this would serve as an inspiration to all the young investigators who are joining us from various parts of the world, especially low middle income countries. The message is that it is possible to develop programs in genetics and genomics and implement genomic medicine in your own countries, own settings. And I hope that my journey serves as an inspiration for all of you who are starting off in your career. Therefore, I'd like to begin by going back. I entered the field of medicine in 1990 when I joined the Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo in Sri Lanka as a medical student. I grew up in an environment which had access to everything, I should say, even though living in a low middle income country setting. Therefore, I was well aware of developments which were happening around the world, especially in Western countries, in genomic medicine. The developments that genetics and genomics was going through, the great advances the Human Genome Project was making, and so on. So, passing out as a medical student, as a medical graduate in 1996, I joined the Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo as a junior academic in 1998 and joined my mentor, Professor Rohan Jayasekara, who pioneered genetics in Sri Lanka to spearhead the development of genetics and later genomics in the country. In 2001, in February 2001, to be precise, as the draft human genome was being unveiled, I had the opportunity of going away to the UK and engaging in research. Interestingly, my research focused on an area of genetics which very few people have researched even today, genetics of preeclampsia. Some of you working in the low-income country settings, and especially in medical settings, would know the devastation that preeclampsia causes to otherwise healthy people, healthy women during pregnancy. And it was by serendipity that I ended up researching genetics of preeclampsia. While doing this work, I had success, and my work resulted in new discoveries, which gave me motivation and which made it possible for me to develop the confidence that I could go back to Sri Lanka and develop not only the services, but also a culture of genetics and genomic research. So in 2004, I came back to Sri Lanka and started developing the services, PhD programs, master's programs in clinical genetics and genetic diagnostics and biomedical informatics, and so on. And a culture of not only education, research, but services slowly started growing in the Human Genetics Unit of the Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo, which at that time was just a two-man department, my mentor and myself, and a few technical officers who were assisting us. I continued my research with PhD students who joined me, and they had their own success. Then I also brought in others and with my colleagues who were working in other parts of the world, such as in Australia, in the same field, and they had their success as well. I also brought in, as new next generation sequencing was coming into the picture, I brought in, introduced metagenomics to the country, and then brought in PhD students to work with me and research genetics of preeclampsia using metagenomic techniques. And we were the first in the world actually to look at the microbiome of the placenta in pregnancy using next generation metagenomics. This work was recognized at international level, especially by the Asia-Oceania Federation of Obstetrics and Gynecology and other learned organizations such as the Society of for Hypertension Society for the Study of Hypertension in Pregnancy. So this success in research gave us and gave me confidence that we could go forward further. Of course, the work that we were doing had to eventually translate into the services. And this is a picture of myself and my mentor a long, long time ago in the clinic. In 2004, automating our cytogenetic services. We were doing it manually at that time. Then we brought in and other techniques to enhance our cytogenetic work. And with that, what we did was we started systematically documenting our patients, our data, and so on. And 59, we had a series of papers which really, for the first time, documented the spectrum of chromosomal abnormalities that were seen in the patient population in our country. At the same time, while developing genetics, we also started developing molecular genetic services. I came back to Sri Lanka in 2004 to a unit which did not have even a PCR machine. But today, over the years, we've been able to develop services rapidly. With the introduction of molecular genetics to the repertoire of genetic diagnostic services that we were offering, we went to do more work, providing genetic testing, not only to the usual conventional genetic diagnostic services that you would find in a conventional genetic unit, but also providing testing for other conditions for which the complex conditions for which there is also those rare groups of genetic entities, as it were. The key, however, was working with colleagues, and I'd like to share with you a little bit of the work that that I was able to do by bringing in more colleagues into my department. We started, and with that, we were able to bring in more and more young people who were, very proactive on implementing genetics and genomics in the country. So the first set of people that I want to showcase to you are young. I can characterize them as young investigators: Dulika Sumatipala and Neelam Thakur from Nepal, who joined us to our master's course in 2010. And they helped us develop our neurogenetic research. Both of them were interested, and these were some of the papers which for the first time documented the neurogenetic disorders, the spectrum of genetic variants underlying neurogenetic disorders in our country. Another young investigator, Dr. Nirmala Sirisena, who co-chairs the Young Investigator Forum of the G2MC, she had an interest in cancer as well as a lot of other things, but I'm going to just share with you her interest in cancer. She later on read for a PhD with me and published extensively on genetics of sporadic breast cancer. And then is today spearheading our cancer genetics program. While we were bringing in these colleagues and developing these different lines of research, we were also mindful of what was going on internationally. So as next generation sequencing was coming into the picture, we decided that we should sequence Lankan. And in 2010, we had the first experience of sequencing entire genome in collaboration with some of our colleagues in India, and launching that in the very early days of our work. With that, that was our entry to genomic medicine, as it were. And that also gave us the opportunity to rethink how we are doing our work. We wanted to rethink the way we are doing our work and then realign. So what we call a genomic medicine clinical and research program in our unit. So all the patients who were coming to us were getting into were going through the diagnostic mill, as it were. And then these resulted not only in the clinical services for these patients, but also in reports of interesting rare conditions. Then we also started cataloging genetic variants in our population, and building an in-house Sri Lankan genetic variation database, and of course, in limited fashion, depositing that work in global databases as well. Then we started identifying various genetic conditions and reviewing the literature, making gene lists, and then looking and starting review articles which reviewed some of the spectrum of genetic variants in the disorders that were of interest to us. And of course, then looking at, with that background knowledge of the global populations, going into our own population and looking at the variants that are found in our people, and then publishing some of that work as well. And then going on to doing functional work on novel genetic variants of unknown significance that we find increasingly in our population, because you would find when you start researching unresearched populations such as ours, or under-researched populations such as ours, there'll be large number of novel variants on which you really don't know what they mean. And then going on to do the functional studies, as it were. We are also aspirational in the sense that we would like to do natural products, work to look at the newer compounds, but that is an area that we haven't really developed so far, and that is an aspiration that we would do that in the future. So with this background, we documented the work that we were doing and published this paper on our experience in introducing genomic medicine in Sri Lanka. And I'd like to invite all of you who are interested to read that paper. At the same time, I had the good fortune of being invited to join the first meeting of the global leaders in genomic medicine in Washington, D.C. in January 2014, which led to the birth of the Global Genomic Medicine Collaborative. The experience that I gained by working with all of you in the G2MC community has been massive. And I think the real opportunity has now opened up for all the young investigators within my community in Sri Lanka, also to engage a global community through the G2MC. So therefore, I'm really happy with the work that we do with the G2MC and the opportunities that it has created for all of us in Sri Lanka. Our genomic medicine program has focused on two areas. One, rare disorders, the other, inherited cancer syndromes. So our work on rare disorders is spearheaded by another young investigator, Dissanayake H.W, who is also one of the young investigator representatives in the steering committee of the G2. Dissanayak's work has resulted in a substantial amount of publications of novel discoveries in the Sri Lankan population. And I'd like to invite you to search her out in PubMed and look at the work that she has published. In cancer is spearheaded by Nirmala, and her work is also extensively published, and there is more to come in the coming years, because we are now got to a stage where we have sequenced a large number of Sri Lankan patients with and families with inherited cancer syndromes. While we were doing this work, implementing genomic medicine in the clinic, we were also interested in moving into other areas of genetics and genomics. And obviously, this was pharmacogenomics. Working with our colleagues in Singapore at the Genomic Institute of Singapore, we cataloged the pharmacogenetic variants in our population. The interesting part of that work, which is described in this slide, is the fact that we were able to show that the various populations in our country, the Sinhalese, Tamils, and the Moors, were very much similar genetically to each other. And then when we looked at the similarity of our population to the South Asian populations, It was also quite similar as shown in this piece, principal component analysis plots. When we went and compared our population with the East Asian populations, the distances started emerging. And then when we went in further and compared all our populations with the Western Europeans, the distances were even more. This kind of information is informing now regulation. So we've been able to influence regulation, inform the regulators that we need to work on implementing pharmacogenomics in our country, because that is there lies the safety and efficacy of the medicines that are being prescribed by the doctors. So that's is a way we've also been able to influence regulation. We've also been interested in implementing precision medicine. So we've been introducing tests such as KRAS mutation testing, EGFR testing, and so on, coming from the discoveries and the advances that have been made in other parts of the world in our own setting, and making them available to our clinicians. Going further, we have also been interested in generating our own data in these fields. Paper which came out very recently was one of the first attempts anywhere in the Asian region to look at possible biomarkers for intervention in myelodysplastic syndrome, coming from our work that was done by two of my PhD students in collaboration with my other colleague in the department, hematologist Dr. Hemali Gunasekara. So, ladies and gentlemen, in the past 15 to 20 minutes, I've taken you through a quick journey of all the things that we've been able to implement in a low middle income country setting. I'd like to point you to this paper that we published a couple of years ago, which document some of this work. And I'd be happy to at any point share with you insights into how you can go forward. I'm also happy that we've been able to not only develop services in our country, but also influence and support other countries in the region. Genetic services in Nepal have been developed exclusively by the doctors and scientists that we trained in Colombo, and they've gone back to develop genetic services in their country. And Neelam Thakur is one of them who's spearheading the work there. And then we also have Rupesh Mishra, who has been a regular participant in all our G2MC meetings virtually this year and last year. Has also gone back and is developing services. They are young investigators who have spearheaded the development of services in their countries. So, in summary, so what were the critical success factors, as it were? This is my list of success factors. Motivation and self-belief is so very important. If you're giving leadership, you've got to be motivated, and you have to have that belief that you can bring about change no matter what. You've got to work in teams. You cannot develop services as an individual. You've got to work in teams. If you are developing education, research, and clinical services as a whole, and that's what I had to do, because our unit in Sri Lanka is the premier unit for genetics and genomics in the country, and the trendsetter in both for both the national sector, for both the government sector and the private sector. So it's very important to be able to work in team. And when you are working in teams, you've got to be inclusive. You need to get everybody to participate, no matter who you are and what you are, and what your strengths and weaknesses are. And as a leader, you need to really bring about the best in everybody, identify the strengths, and enable people to shine and take things forward. And that also leads to the fact that you've got to reward merit. You've got to identify the talented people and ensure that the environment is created for them to go forward. And that's what I've been doing, building up teams. It is so very important in the developing country setting or the low middle income country setting, because there is a cultural hesitancy to, what I say, hire people who are better than you. And then as a result of things, you've got great principal investigators, great mentors who really the services and the institutions that they develop during their lifetime crumble later on afterwards. So I'm someone who always advocates for hiring people who are better than you. Then, of course, you've got to be ready to do whatever that is required in a low middle income country setting, where you are probably the only genetic service you're providing the only genetic service in that country or that region. You've got to be able to work with everyone and cater to everyone's demands, and that's what we've been doing in Sri Lanka. And you would have seen the spectrum of things that we were doing. They were all coming out of interest of different people, catering to the interest of the different people. And I kind of very rarely have said no to anyone who wanted to collaborate with us. So collaboration is the key. Collaboration locally as well as internationally is so very important. And finally, of course, funding. If you are willing to do all what I said, all the things that I listed before this, funding will flow. If you start with funding, nothing will flow. So it is important for you to start with the other things, and then funding will flow. And of course, funding may not be available at the scale that you get them in the West, but then with international collaboration, you can tap into such funding. And finally, you got to have your succession plan. You develop things, as I said before, you can be a great investigator, you can develop things, but if you have developed institutions, you've developed research programs, you've developed educational programs, you've developed clinical services, you've got to have a succession plan. And succession cannot be done overnight. It takes time, it takes effort. And so you got to start well ahead of when you plan to, go into retirement, as it were, to succeed and to ensure that your organization has a good successor who can take over from you and take things to a different level. So with those words, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to wind up this talk. I'd like to, I've acknowledged all the people who've been a part of my journey in implementing genetics and genomics in the country. And I'd also like to thank all the colleagues in G2MC from whom, I have drawn inspiration, listening to them, listening to the work that they do, interacting with them, the style of their work, and so on. And it's been a pleasure to be a part of the G2MC family, as it were. And I'm sure the young investigators who are joining us from all parts of the world will also have similar experiences as they go through this journey of implementing genomic medicine in your countries together with G2MC. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vajira. If we were live, you would be hearing lots of applause from the audience right now. So I'm hoping you're hearing it well. And we have time for a few questions. If you want to put your questions in the chat or raise your hand, I will call on you. And I put one question out there for Vajira relevant to his comments around funding recently, and just whether in concurrence with his incredibly successful efforts in Sri Lanka, I was wondering what the status of the life science industry partnerships are there. obviously a source of funding and technology, and how for low and middle income countries do you accomplish getting industry to pay attention to you and invest?
Thanks, Jeff, for that question. It's a very, very relevant and pertinent question. For example, going back 15, 20 years when I returned from UK, when I wanted to, do some of the testing in the country, there were, the big giants in of the world who are, reagent suppliers, for molecular genetics industry, basically refused. They said Sri Lanka has no market. You're the only guy who's, ordering these, and it doesn't make sense for us to invest on your, little project. And that's the kind of thing that we go through. And then again, I experienced that when we, started doing, got our MySeq and started testing in Sri Lanka. We had the same problem, and it wasn't, cost effective for Illumina to be, supplying us, and we had to go, really have a struggle even now on, maintaining the supply chain. But I think, the silver lining in COVID is that everybody had to start doing real-time PCR testing, and around that, I think even in other countries, entire industry has grown now, and the supply chains are well established, and so on. So I think it would augur well for the future. We would have the life science industry, I think, is going to go everywhere, and that will, I think, augur well for all of us.
Thank you for that. In the chat, there are lots of kudos and applause for your efforts in Sri Lanka. And I would suggest that when we can travel again safely, that one of the places we should hold our forum for the G2MC is in Sri Lanka, both to bring more attention to what the wonderful work you've done there, but also to galvanize the community around the issues around bringing genomic medicine to limited resource settings like Sri Lanka, and you've been greatly successful there. So congratulations. I'm not seeing any questions or comments in the chat, except more about what an inspiration you are, and thank you for your leadership in this area, and also for your enormous contributions to the G2MC.
Thank you, Jeff. It has been a pleasure always to work with the G2MC community, and I've been always encouraging my colleagues also to take part in the activities, and it will be a pleasure for us to host G2MC in Sri Lanka when the time is right, and we can all travel in the future. So thank you very much.
Yeah, much appreciated for your kicking off the meeting today. I think we're going to move now into the working group report outs, starting with one of your own, the education working group led by you, Bruce Korf, and Rich Haspel. We have about 20 minutes for each report out. And one of the things I'll just say before turning it over to your team is we should be thinking with all of our working groups about the focus to bring genomic medicine to low resource settings. And I think it's important also for us to at least think about the impact and opportunity for addressing this incredible pandemic that we're all experiencing. Whether genomic medicine can potentially address some of those issues in a small way would be great to understand. So with that, I will turn it over. It looks like maybe Bruce, are you the spokesperson?
I seem to have drawn the straw, so yeah, I'm the one that's going to speak, but Rich and Vajira are on and can chime in as needed. So why don't we go ahead a slide or two? I'm not sure. Yeah, we can push ahead one more. So we'll go over quite a few things here that arose from the breakout session that occurred, I guess, a week ago. And rather than read them all to you, let me just go straight ahead. Next, please. I wanted to start with a few, what I guess you could say are foundational issues. And this was discussed with the working group, but I thought these would be of value to bring forward to this larger group. A few premises that I hope would be agreed upon easily. One is that if we're going to implement genomic medicine, we need to educate both providers and the public, wherever that may be. The different areas of the world differ in the resources available to provide the education. I think the mission of G2MC, as articulated here, was also stated earlier by Jeff, and this includes a commitment to promoting educational programs. And then finally, there are areas of genomic medicine education that are more or less universal, I would say, to any part of the world, and others that need to be customized, either because the needs of the population are different, the kind of genomic structure, if you will, of the populations may be different, and different conditions are relevant more in some places than others, but also health systems differ, and customs differ, and priorities differ. So we need some core things that probably are transferable anywhere, and then the ability to customize. Next, please. So with those as kind of, in a way, statements of our mission, there are some challenges that we face. The first is that it takes time and resources to develop educational products. And a recurring theme you'll hear here in this presentation is that the working group includes lots of people who are interested in participating, but we need people who will take ownership of particular educational projects. They can't all be led by the three of us, for example. Second is that to really do this right, there are pedagogical principles and outcomes assessments that need to be put in place. Probably all of us have, slide sets and teaching that we do, but that's not necessarily easily transferable into the context of global education in genomic medicine. Then third point is there are lots of educational platforms that have been developed, especially in places that have invested heavily in genomic medicine, and many of our own members are involved in these efforts. And that leads to the question, what's the unique niche of G2MC? Do we just copy over what's been done, or do we develop things of our own? How do we kind of find our place? Then genomic medicine, as you all know, is a very rapidly moving area, and it's one thing to develop educational materials, it's another to sustain them and to keep them current. And the moving target that we face is, I think, obvious to us all. And finally, the cliche, the perfect may be the enemy of the good. We could spin our wheels forever talking about how to do this right, and the outcome is we don't do anything at all except talk about it. And so finding a sweet spot between putting stuff out that's not necessarily sustainable or of good quality versus waiting for the absolutely perfect product is one of the challenges I think this group faces. Next, please. Oops, that went back instead of forward, I think. Yeah, there we go. All right, some of the things that we bring to the table is membership from diverse settings who presumably are familiar with the customs and needs of their area. The G2MC working groups and flagship projects, I think it's fair to say they probably all have educational needs attached to them, and there's opportunities for collaboration. I think we're blessed with good staff support, and there is name recognition, I think, now of G2MC, and the potential therefore to attract some funding that may help with sustainability. And the fact that we do have a regular, more or less regular schedule of international meetings, COVID notwithstanding, provides a kind of natural platform for some of our educational activities. Next. All right, so let me now switch to some of the things that this working group has done. And so first off, a international needs assessment was conducted, and we're in process of writing this up for publication. We have a student actually who's been working on it over now past 6+ months. We are planning for the immersion course, which of course was expected to happen in Santiago last year and now this year, and now I hope perhaps next year. So that keeps getting put off because of COVID. Meanwhile, as you'll see in a minute, a survey has been conducted in the Santiago area to learn about the needs of people locally. And we do have plans moving forward to develop a case-based education session. There is a discussion about organizing courses on a more kind of sort of routine basis. And what we're thinking is the immersion course may serve as the kind of first model for this. We have put out a request for existing resources to post on the website, and we have several young investigators who have joined the working group. Next, please. This is a map showing the location of individuals who responded to the G2MC Education Needs Survey, and it's color-coded by high, upper, and middle income countries, with actually a pretty good representation of a diversity of income levels. And you can see the numbers here. 113 altogether were finally analyzed out of 198 that were received. Those that weren't, it's because the respondents didn't feel knowledgeable about the educational landscape in their country. Next. So some of the areas of focus that the group has identified include the immersion course, trying to integrate young investigators into the working group. And a point I made already is the need for project leaders. Co-chairs can certainly provide support, but we can't drive everything. Next. One of the things that we ascertained in the survey was what kinds of potential learners do you, who a respondent, have access to? And this included a pretty broad diversity of audiences, including many that were not trained at all in genetics, physicians, nurses, pharmacists, and so forth, and others that are geneticists. So I guess one thing we did learn from this survey was our members actually have a lot of potential audiences that they can reach, and of course represent also a diversity of expertise. Next, please. This is a data set that Gabriela Repetto, who's co-chair of the Someday Santiago meeting, has put together with the help of CME groups at Clinica Alemana, which is her institution. It wasn't a very large number who responded, but there were responses to questions about what kind of content. And you notice that the skyscrapers in the bar chart above are pharmacogenomics on the far right, and hereditary cancer. And then everything else was also reasonably high. I mean, there were no areas that were thought to be of minimal interest, but these were the two that were the biggest ones. And there were a number of people who were identified locally who could help to participate. A majority, though not by any means everybody, felt that having Spanish language teaching would facilitate learning. There is an option for translation. And we've actually talked about pairing international speakers with local speakers. It still requires some kind of translational capability, but on the one hand, it would be great to have people who can speak the language locally, but on the other hand, there was a sense that having international people with reputations and experience in this area would be attractive. So we are looking now at case-based interactive sessions and identifying people who would be willing to lead these, perhaps, as I said, pairing local and invited outside speakers. Now, all of this, I guess it's the blessing and the curse of this having been put off, because we have plenty of time now, since we're not really sure when a face-to-face meeting will occur. And we're not that confident that a Zoom type meeting of this sort is going to be as successful, because we need to motivate people to actually participate. But the curse is that when it's that far off, there's a tendency to kind of focus on other things. So we're going to have to try to keep this on people's agenda, because at the moment it's probably the major educational initiative of the group. Next, please. So, from here, if we can make this immersion course happen in Santiago, we should be able to make it happen in other places in the future. And so this could become almost like a franchise of this group, that wherever and whenever we're having an international meeting, we would accompany it by an immersion course targeting the local community. Then there's the possibility of recording this and putting it into an online context. Once we have identified the teaching staff and have created cases and other learning materials, those can be put into an enduring place. And if this is something that gets replicated over time, they really would become a standing faculty who would need to update their materials on some schedule. There has been a proposal to develop an online sort of course that includes groups that help to customize this to regional needs. And we're thinking maybe the immersion course can serve as the kind of initial platform or seed, if you will, from which this kind of thing can grow. There's been other discussion about creating an online repository of lectures and cases. Here, we come back to the point of, on the one hand, doing this right is not the same as just doing it. On the other hand, the perfect being the enemy of the good. There are a lot of examples of this that various groups have done. I think some of pretty good quality, some less so, and how we work this through so that it's different from what's out there and of good quality, I think is a challenge for the group. But probably more than anything else, we need somebody to step forward and be willing to curate this. And then finally, many of our members have already existing educational resources, and we have the capability of linking to them so that at least there's a kind of aggregation of sites that people can shop on the G2MC website for. Next, please. The other point is that I think I mentioned earlier, the various working groups and flagship groups all are going to have educational needs. We've already had an active discussion with the rare disease flagship, where there's certainly going to be a need to educate groups about the informatics, for example, and the kind of clinical disorders that get identified, creating a regular conference that would be a collaboration of the rare disease group and the education working group seems like a kind of natural, but this would be similarly possible with any of the working groups and flagship groups. Next, please. A few of the things just to think about, I've said it again and again, can't say it enough. We need working group members, not just to say we'll help out, but somebody's got to be willing to step forward and own the projects, because the bandwidth of 3 people leading it is just not sufficient to own it all. There's some discussion about, should the group have, 1 or more, what I'm calling here, key branded projects. I mean, do we just say, come to us with your ideas, if you're willing to run with them, that's great, and we'll support you? Or are we, should we have a few things that we really put a lot of effort and resources into? I think we're kind of headed towards a hybrid model. At the moment, the immersion course is likely to be that key branded project, and it can, as I mentioned, evolve not only into a recurring thing, but into an online course as well. And then if we're going to post materials that people contribute, how do we vet them for quality? Do we just take anything anybody's created and put it up there? Or do we need to have some way of reviewing it to be sure that it is, kind of meets with standards that G2MC is willing to support? Next, please. So kind of our schedule for this coming several months, the needs survey, there is a draft of a paper to be submitted for publication, be working on the immersion course, looking for collaborations with other groups, and starting to post member resources on the website. Next, please. I think that is it. I'll give a moment for Rich and Vajira to chime in if there's anything they'd like to add. And after that, we're open to questions and comments.
That was great, Bruce. It's Rich. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, Bruce, that's great. I also agree that you covered everything that we discussed.
All right. Well, any questions or comments then for any of us?
So we do have a few minutes for questions or comments. So please put them in the chat or go ahead and raise your hand.
Bruce, this is Jeff. Thanks for a great overview. And obviously you need help. And I'm wondering how you want people to engage that might be on this call today or have fellows or trainees that might be interested in working with you. What's the way to get engaged?
So I guess my answer would be there's two kinds of things that people, or two or three kinds of things actually. First thing is if you either yourself or you have a trainee, let's say, who wants to develop a kind of portfolio of educational materials and view that as a scholarly contribution that hopefully would benefit them in terms of promotion, for example. In other words, if you have a more education-oriented faculty member that you mentor, please let us know about them, and we can speak with them and see if there are things they would like to really develop. Because I think, as most of you know, getting academic credit for education is more than giving a lecture when you're invited. It's developing a curriculum, doing something that's original. And G2MC provides a platform that young investigators can grow an educational portfolio for those who are interested in doing that. So if you've got people you're mentoring that you think would be interested in doing that, please send them our way and we'll be glad to engage them. Secondly is if you know of or are involved in educational efforts where you have materials that you're at least willing to link with G2MC, again, let us know those, and those we can begin to populate on the website. And then finally, if you're part of another working group or flagship project and you see an opportunity for educational collaboration with the working group, we'd love to have that conversation with you and see where the common ground is.
I'll just add the project groups, the other working groups, and the flagship projects. If they can, just be thinking about this. I believe the rare disease group had a section of their discussion about education. So just also reach out within those groups to see if there is interest. And G2MC for an educational researcher is an amazing opportunity because you have access to an international cohort of learners and expertise. So for someone who wants to do a project, whether to get something published or for scholarly reasons, whatever, I mean, from our needs assessment survey, it's an incredible, you have a wide variety of learners. So, but the idea is we just need people who want to, take the lead with that. So just reach out to us. And we welcome ideas, but we also more welcome an idea and someone who wants to kind of run with it, with of course our support, helping to provide guidance. So I would just say also, have the working groups and the flagship projects keep this in mind too.
There have been a few people who have offered ideas in the chat, and I guess we'll have to just copy these and get back to people, a few who have proposed areas of need in bioinformatics and in molecular diagnostics, and also have identified some educational resources that we can link to. So we'll try to copy who these people are and get back to them individually.
Oh, and the only other thing I'll add is, you know, we reached out to the young investigators that are kind of assigned to the education group to, you know, if they want to lead and we're going to help, but it could be any young investigator too, who happens to have an interest in education, and we could guide them through. And like, it's been great. Bruce had a medical student who really helped us with the survey. And, you know, I think a collaboration like that with an advisor, but then someone more junior, you know, trying to drive the bus is a good model if people like that and stuff.
Hi all, this is Alan Schuldiner. I haven't had figured out how to raise my hand. I don't think I'm hallucinating this, but didn't I see recently an RFA from NIH to engage genetic counselors for several months for a research experience? I'm wondering whether that RFA may be appropriate for this mechanism to get genetic counselors who want to get some protected time, come back in a research agenda, and maybe in the education front as part of the G2MC effort would be a fantastic experience, I would think.
So that, I'm glad you brought that up. There are grant opportunities available through the NIH. There aren't only RFAs for summer, there are RFAs at NHGRI, at NCI, and others to create courses. The issue is, I think many of those are supposed to be focused on learners in the United States. But yes, the idea is, I'm glad that was brought up, there's also potential funding opportunities that could be applied for, that there might be money available to provide salary support. I've gotten some grants that way, or a grant that way. So salary support to create, because it does take money, especially to create online modules and stuff. So that would be another component of this, would be consideration, especially if you develop some preliminary data to perhaps develop, you could apply for a grant and look into those aspects as well.
I think I'm getting the message that we have to wrap this up to cede the floor to the next group. So thanks to everybody who's put things in the chat, and we will try to circle back on those. So thank you.
And thank you guys. Thanks to the Education Working Group. We'll put a call out to the G2MC with a lot of your messages after this meeting. So you will get hopefully some additional volunteers and some resources, links, etc. And it's the discussion of the last few minutes in particular around young investigators is a great segue into the Young Investigators Working Group, which I hope will be active in all of our working groups in some form or another. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stefania and Nirmala for their report out for the Young Investigators Group.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. First of all, I would also like to thank Professor Dissanayake for the interesting talk that was indeed motivating, especially for all of us, the young investigators. It is really important to listen to the challenges, the barriers that you, the pioneers of the field, had to overcome, and not only the accomplishments that you managed to achieve. Thank you again. My co-chair, Nirmala, couldn't attend today's meeting, so I'm glad that I will present you the report from the fruitful breakout session that was held a couple of weeks ago. Here is the agenda outline as this was discussed in our breakout session. First, we will mention the progress that has already been made in our group, and then we will discuss the main areas of focus, the goals we want to achieve, and how we plan to do that. As for our current progress, since last fall, when 30 young investigators were selected for joining our efforts, each one of them is already matched with the working group or flagship project that suits best their background and expertise. New young investigators that attended the breakout session and want to collaborate with us should complete their respective Google form providing information in order to be appropriately matched. Also, the Secretariat staff, our HANA, have created a very helpful list of the young investigators' contact details, as well as an email group in order for all of us to be better get in touch and exchange ideas. As for our areas of focus, of course, our main focus is on the virtual meeting in September. Given that the abstracts that were previously selected for podium presentations or flash talks are now quite old, we will ask the authors to revise them. Also, a new submission call will be announced soon. As it was explicitly stated from the beginning of this subcommittee, the main goal of this group is to bring closer the young investigators with the pioneer researchers and co-chairs. To this end, we will establish a mentoring platform. Also, the Young Investigators Award consists our third area of focus in an effort to show in practice that we do appreciate the work and progress that is being done by the new researchers. Each one of these three goals that I just mentioned will be outlined afterwards, paying attention to the framework and our next steps. As for the Young Investigators Forum that will be held virtually next September, we thoroughly discussed about the new submission call and the evaluation of the abstracts and the respective timelines. In the evaluation process, 5 or maybe 6 young investigators will be included in the abstract review committee. We are really glad that a few young investigators have already shown interest in participating. The brief CVs of the participants will be evaluated and the selected young investigators will be announced soon. As we discussed, the criteria that should be met in order for the young investigators to be included in this committee refer to their publication status and their review experience. The committee will also be responsible in providing guidance in terms of drafting abstracts, the presentations, and the posters. It is important to highlight that all selected young investigator abstracts will be published in e-format after the conference. As for the timeline specifically, the abstract review committee will be set up by mid of February. The abstract submission deadline will be the end of April. The notifications as for the selected abstracts will be at the end of June in order to give enough time to the authors to prepare accordingly their presentations. The awards to be given still need to be discussed further with the abstract review committee once it is set up. As we said, our second area of focus is the mentoring platform. Based on the career panel that met great success in the previous conference, we thought of the establishment of the mentoring platform. It is true that we received valuable feedback from all young investigators that attended this breakout session. So our proposition is to schedule periodic meetings of the young investigators with senior members of the G2MC. The setup of an online repository will also be valuable so as for the young investigators to upload their work for critique. Such a feedback could potentially lead to one-to-one meetings with the mentor for further clarifications. That way, the mentoring platform will be transformed to a shared platform for threaded conversations, suggestions, and ideas that will hopefully move forward the goals of G2MC alongside the personal career goals of the young investigators. The young investigators also expressed their needs to be addressed. Their first goal is to get in touch with potential mentors. By this interaction, they will have the chance to identify new career options and research collaborations, and also be given guidance regarding the budgeting and proposal development, and why not how to run their own lab and projects. So we will need to develop this timeline regarding the establishment of this platform, taking into consideration all the ideas and suggestions just discussed, and also investigating the existing tools, for example, software, online services that can facilitate and enable this sharing. One next, please. Regarding the Young Investigators Awards, as it was proposed by our mentors, it is really important in order to keep up the flame of this group, to propose tangible, meaningful, and really beneficial awards to those young investigators that significantly contribute to our efforts. Travel funding for attending conferences related to the field was suggested by our young investigators, as well as the scholarship for on-site training with a senior G2MC member. Of course, we are still open to suggestions and other types of awards and recognitions that would be valuable to the career development of the young investigators. And for this purpose, the Secretariat will develop the structure of G2MC awards and secure the financial support. In our breakout session, additional issues were raised that we wish to communicate with you now. An additional issue to consider refers to the compilation of scientific papers by young investigators on their experiences and challenges in implementing genomic medicine globally, and of course the opportunities for collaboration. My co-chair Nirmala described her experience with a program at the NHGRI, in which they each provided their individual perspective. Based on that, for our proposal, each of the G2MC young investigators would produce a section of their experiences and challenges. The group will then compare and contrast, in other words, outline the common challenges and highlight anything that is unique. They could evaluate implementing genomics in emerging countries, specifically South America and Africa were discussed, and they could look at the applicability of solutions that work in developed worlds to LMICs, and what the challenges still would be, what cannot be done. As for the Young Investigator Spotlight in quarterly newsletter, an individual spotlight specifically for one or two young investigators that could be chosen alphabetically or by research interest or just by those that volunteer could be held. Their picture and their interests in and out of the science field, as well as directed questions from the communication director, could be included in this section. As for the guidance section, that includes how to achieve the next step in their career. Probably our mentors could hopefully help towards that, and the opportunities for awards, mentorship, etc. As for these two additional issues to consider, we welcome young investigators who are interested in joining the writing group, as for the genetic medicine experience paper. Also, our Secretariat will develop the spotlight section structure and contact young investigators to highlight for the next newsletter. As the main goal of our group is the active engagement of the young investigators in the G2MC groups, so as to move forward ongoing and future initiatives, the ways to collaborate were thoroughly discussed. The young investigator volunteers have already been connected to working groups and flagship projects, and those who just stepped up, they're welcome to contact the Secretariat to complete their interest form. As a footnote, given that the cancer project is being wrapped into the risk assessment and family health history project, the Secretariat will contact the young investigators connected with the cancer project in the first place, so as to check their interest in joining other working groups and projects or participating in the joint one. To wrap up, we're indeed looking forward to the virtual Young Investigator Forum in September, hoping that the submission call for new abstracts will exceed our expectations, as this already happened in the previous call. We deeply think that the setup of the mentoring platform will be proven really important and beneficial for the young investigators, and of course that the Young Investigator Awards will fulfill their goal, the tangible reward for their efforts in moving forward the G2MC and their careers as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefania.
Thank you.
And
there's again a problem.
Jeff, your bandwidth is a little slow. So as Jeff's bandwidth is having some difficulty, we do have some time for questions. I believe that's what he's saying right now.
I think there is already one question.
Yes. There is one in the chat. Jeff, your bandwidth is stuttering again. Should we go ahead and say the one question in the chat, which was from
Yes.
Jeff? How can we sign up to be mentors to the YIs?
The truth is that our mentors is Professor George Patrinos and Professor Jurgen. I don't really know the right pronunciation. I'm sorry for that. I think
Reichardt? Yes.
Yes, exactly. But I don't know, probably we should discuss it further with our mentors. It's good to have more mentors, and I think that this mentoring platform would enable this interaction with more pioneers in the field and senior G2MC members.
So in order to have a stable of mentors on the platform, how should we go ahead to collect names or have them speak up and say that they have the availability to become a mentor on this platform? As G2MC is a voluntary group of members, whether or not they have the actual availability and bandwidth to take on a new student is one question. So I think our membership needs to assess that and then put their names forward to the young investigators and to the secretariat so we can collect their names and put them on the platform as available mentors to be able to be matched. So we can create that process as we have with the young investigators. What would you suggest to be a deadline to have our G2MC membership step forward to become mentors?
Probably this month.
Okay. So by the end of February?
Exactly. Given that we are going to set up the abstract review committee, maybe it will be helpful to have this done this month as well. But I deeply think that this mentoring platform would be an excellent idea that would combine what we've already said. That, of course, we have Professor George Patrinos and Reinhard as our mentors officially, but with this mentoring platform, everyone that wants to disseminate their knowledge and help us move forwards our dreams and careers will be willing to do that.
And there's one question in chat. Is there a specific prerequisite to be part of the Young Investigators Working Group? For young investigators, there is an outline of what the requirements are for being a young investigator. We can provide that to you, but it's typically a student, someone who is in a training program, graduate program, PhD, or within a fellowship, or 2 years out of a fellowship, so a junior faculty that has just graduated or just received a terminal degree. We're also accepting young investigators who are seasoned in research but are switching their career path to genomic medicine and genomic medicine implementation. And so within 2 years of that switch, so we can our mentors can provide guidance to them in genomic medicine implementation, in becoming more versed in this field.
And the truth is that we do have such volunteers, such young investigators, that they switch their career, and these last 2 years are in the field of genomic medicine.
Okay. So we have a few more minutes. Any more questions, please?
Thank you, my mentor. I'm sorry.
If there's no more discussion, that was a terrific presentation, Stefania and Nirmala. Thank you for your excellent work on the young investigators. I think the mentorship platform is a spectacular idea, and I really do hope it solidifies the ability for young investigators to deliver genomic medicine globally. So we'll continue now with our agenda, and the next session is on rare diseases, and Alan Schuldiner and Vajira Dissanayake will present the report out from this working group.
Well, thanks, Jeff. It's Alan Schuldiner, and of course, Vajira, please chime in as needed. I also noticed that we've got Tony Polin and Claudia Gonzaga-Drigu on the call, so please chime in to help provide the update. Next slide. So, like other talks before me, I'll give an overview of the working group meeting that went for about two and a half hours last week. In summary, this was a really great meeting, and special thanks to all who participated in the meeting. You know, it was a great meeting when you listen much more than you talk as the chair and co-chair of the working group meeting, and that's exactly how this meeting went. We got a lot of great input from now more than a dozen clinical sites that have signed up for this flagship program. Next slide. So some of you have seen this slide before, but it continues to develop and get busier and busier and more colorful. And this is essentially the overall schemata of how we're envisioning this rare undiagnosed diseases program. It involves multiple moving parts, but it all starts really with the clinical sites that are seeing patients in low resource setting, underserved populations that are in great need of molecular diagnoses through exome sequencing, but for which there's just not access. And you can see now we have at least 14 clinical sites that are very interested in participating in this flagship program. And you could see all of the countries where these sites reside. Really an impressive collection, and we expect this to grow further. By my count, these 14 sites expect to accumulate at least 3,000 to 3,500 patients per year. So over a 3-year period, we might be able to make molecular diagnoses, or at least attempt to do so, in as many as 10,000 patients in need of a diagnosis. And of course, we would be sequencing trios and extended pedigrees. So, you know, we're talking about over the course of 3 years, the sequencing of perhaps 30 to 50,000 exomes from populations around the world. The clinical sites would be coordinated through 2 hubs. One of them, of course, is G2MC, which will serve as the administrative hub for this project. And the University of Maryland, which would serve as the coordinating hub for the project. And you can see each of the roles that G2MC and the University of Maryland would play for this project. Ultimately, DNA samples would come to the Regeneron Genetics Center for sequencing, and those results at the end of the day returned to the clinical sites for diagnosis. Next slide. So in terms of the current progress, I think we've been making a lot of good, steady progress. At the last meeting last week, for one thing, we welcomed 4 energetic young investigators who will assist with various aspects of the project. I think one of the lightning rods for such a successful meeting was that we began with a talk from Kevin Strauss, who heads the Clinic for Special Children in Strasburg, Pennsylvania. And he went through his experience with implementing exome sequencing for rare undiagnosed diseases in this underserved population, and particularly the nuts and bolts of the collaboration that the Clinic for Special Children have had with the Regeneron Genetics Center now for the past 6 years. Publication is shown for those who were unable to join his talk that summarizes their experience. And really, this talk, I think, really enlightened the group as to really what's possible in terms of implementing across these 14 or more sites around the world. So we then jumped into really the nitty-gritty and became much more granular with the project and how it would roll out. We reviewed and refined the workflow, and especially paid special attention, and will need to do more so, to the requirements and the needs of individual clinical sites, since each is its own story and each has different capabilities and requirements and needs for implementation of genomic medicine at their sites. Next slide. And this slide was not meant for reading, but just to illustrate the fact that we really have become quite granular with the workflow of exactly how this would work, starting with eligibility of actual patients at these clinical sites, all the way through to ultimately the return of a clinical report to the provider at these clinical sites. Again, I'm happy to share these slides, but didn't mean in any way to be reading through these 10 workflow items, but just to illustrate the fact that we have become quite granular with how this is going to come about. Next slide. So what additional issues to consider? We had quite a lot of discussion around all of these issues, but ones that I think are going to require some additional thinking. For one, the point was made that phenotyping really matters. I think clinical geneticists know this quite well. And the fact that we need to think much more about how to harmonize phenotyping across these sites. And again, much more discussion required there. We've also learned that performing cytoscan microarrays is an important step, probably one that should be done before exome sequencing. And as clinical geneticists know, quite complementary to exome sequencing. Some sites have those capabilities, others don't, and we need to think more about how to implement or at least make accessible cytoscan microarrays in addition to exome sequencing. We also, the group also pointed out the importance of having population-specific controls so that the allelic frequencies of healthy population at these sites across the world would be known. And indeed, the current research plan already specifies for the ability to sequence up to 1,000 healthy controls from these various populations in order to generate these population-specific allelic frequency databases, which I think would serve all of these areas quite well, not just for these clinical sites, but potentially a variant browser that can be web accessible for everyone. And we also acknowledge the fact that while standardized workflow is quite important, it's going to be, the requirements are going to be that we're going to need to tailor this to the local site's capabilities, policies, and regulations. And an important next step is going to be for the group to be essentially having one-on-one meetings with each of the local sites to drill down much further with regard to the capabilities of each site and what's required. And we talked a little bit about embedding education in the form of grand rounds and case conferences. And we've already initiated discussions with the education working group to help us with that. Next slide. Barriers to progress. I don't see any major barriers to project, and so I whited out the major part of the title slide. But we do see some barriers, and we, as I've mentioned, continue to make progress on each. And those are bulleted on this slide. Navigating local regulations and policies, including the nitty-gritty of shipment of samples outside of the country. We still need to consider various IP issues that might be relevant to certain localities. We need to manage expectations. Turnaround time may not be perfect, but getting an answer later rather than sooner, or or I should say later rather than not at all, is better than not at all. And we need to manage those expectations. Some discussion came around about dealing with incidental and secondary genetic findings from exome sequencing. Really important topic, one in which we need to understand a lot better. Obtaining funding for the project beyond the in-kind exome sequencing, a challenge, but one in which I think we can conquer. I loved Vajira's comment during his talk that plan great projects and the funding will come. And that's been the philosophy of this flagship project all along. And of course, ultimately funding and resources for capacity building and sustainability of the implementation project once the project is completed. And then, of course, we've been thinking about, beyond molecular diagnoses, the idea that this work could lead to the development of population-specific diagnostic panels. Kevin Strauss provided a great example of that in the plain community. And we also talked about not just stopping at making molecular diagnoses for patients in need, but also potentially being able to connect these patients with therapeutic opportunities. And we talked about essentially, potentially in the future, creating a clinical trials network, one in which potentially pharma companies and biotech companies would be quite interested in to identify patients that would be eligible for clinical trials. And as many know, these rare patients are very difficult to identify for clinical trials. So a lot of value added there in maybe trying to democratize therapeutics and opportunities for clinical trials. Next slide. So ways to collaborate with other G2MC groups. As I've already mentioned, G2MC is going to serve as the administrative hub for the project. We've had discussions with the education working group, and we hope to be able to develop with them a primer course on exome sequencing for rare undiagnosed diseases that will be very important for the clinical sites and beyond. Case conferences of real patients and real exome sequence data, monthly grand rounds, and the like. We'd also like to engage discussion with the evidence working group. There was a lot of discussion, and we were reminded of the fact that this is an implementation project, and through implementation science, we need to study the implementation process so that we can determine what works and what doesn't work. Is there clinical utility in implementing such a program? What are the economics and, of course, the ethical, legal, and social implications of the implementation? So in addition to implementing, we want to study that process, and potentially the evidence working group, but we hope might have interest in helping with some of that. And I've already mentioned local policies in various countries around the world. We believe the policy working group will be able to help in that, and also in local capacity building and sustainability. Next slide. So development of a timeline leading up to the September 2021 meeting. You can see that we have a relatively aggressive timeline, but one that I think is feasible. We think in Q1, we would be able to follow up with all of the individual sites to better understand their local requirements. By late Q1, early Q2, we'll finalize a research plan and the budget associated with that plan, now knowing what the needs of the individual sites are. In Q2, we'll get approval for in-kind sequencing at the Regeneron Genetics Center. A little bit later in that year, mid-year, we hope to secure further funding for the full implementation. At this September 2021 meeting, we'll finalize the planning, late Q4, obtain IRB approval for the project, and we hope to be recruiting our first patients in early 2022. I think that's my last slide. Yeah, so happy to answer any questions, and of course, Vajira and others chime in if there's anything I missed.
Terrific, Alan. But let's hear if Vajira, do you have any additional comments to make?
No, that's great, Alan. I think you covered everything, and so we are getting closer to launching this. We've been working on it for a long time now, but I think, as you said, we are getting more and more granular, which means that we are close to, a launch date, and that's what we were hoping for. I wonder whether Tony has any question, any comments to make. I think Jeff, going forward.
No, just that we're excited to move this forward. I don't have anything else to add. Thank you.
Jeff, I was just going to say that one of the challenges we may face is with the multiple contracting issues. So we'll really need to work on that, and that would be, I think, our biggest challenge.
Yeah. Well, Teji is now an expert at contracting internationally, so hopefully that will be easier than said than done, probably, though.
I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I'm becoming more versed, and I have people who can help me with that. But yes, I agree. Contracting is going to be challenging, and working out those issues. We do have legal advice also to lean on, which have availability from different international perspectives. They are part of a larger international group, and so we can lean on them for working on our contracts also. Which, of course, that will take some funds as part of this whole project.
So Alan, I put a quick comment in the chat about hoping that you will, even before the project starts, write it up as a paper so that others can sort of see what the fantastic work you and your group has done. And also it provides a roadmap, I think, for many things that others might want to emulate. So I would hope that you can muster the energy maybe with young investigators to write something up, and also to note that from my perspective, this project is a great catalyst for other working groups to participate in rare diseases. So the other working groups, as already you mentioned, are going to make contributions, which I think is wonderful to see.
Thanks, Jeff. Both great comments, especially getting the young investigators involved with putting together a manuscript describing the process. And I agree. I think, once this network is humming and together and humming, I think other flagship projects can really tap into the resource. Family history is an obvious one, but others as well.
Definitely, we can cross-collaborate within the G2MC community in this project in multiple ways.
Other questions or comments for Alan and Vajira? Don't be shy. If not, so ahead. Somebody wanted to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah. Maybe I'm sorry for this question because I'm a new member in the G2MC, but I would like to know if is it a biannual process or is it a manual process? What I mean is you look for ideas for funds the first year, then you implement the project the next year. How does it work, especially for a rare disease group?
Well, I think we're figuring this out as we go. I don't think there is any particular approach. Anything that works to me is a way forward. In this particular case, as Vajira mentioned, I think this has been in the planning stage for at least 2 years, maybe longer, and we continue to make steady progress. a lot of pieces need to fit together, and this is kind of what the working group has been doing over that period of time. So I don't think there's any specific formula that we can quote, whatever works.
And I would say, thanks, Alan, that if you have ideas for projects, there's no reason not to bring them up either to the G2MC leadership or to the working group leaders for the appropriate area. And, we'll see if we can make it work. We'd love to, have ideas from our members.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no more questions. First, thanks, Alan and Vajira for that great overview, and also to the other working group chairs for this morning, or for the first session of today's meeting. It's 45 minutes almost after the hour, and we're going to take a 30-minute break and come back at 15 minutes after the next hour. So please come back. There's a lot more great work to share with you and to get your comments and engagement with. So come back in 30 minutes, please, and we'll see you then.
Teiji, Hannah, this is Grant. I'm just doing a sound check.
Hi, Grant. Thanks. And we can hear you fine.
Great.
Welcome, and thank you for waking up so early in the morning.
Sure.
Hear me as well? This is Theodora.
Hi, Theodora. Yes, you sound a little like you're in a tunnel, but we can hear you fine.
Okay. I'm charging my earphones, so I think I'll be fine.
Okay, that actually you sound better now.
Better, thank you.
Okay, as we start getting people back into the room, we have just a few more minutes. It's 9:15 or it's 15 past the hour at the moment. And we will start with the Family Health History Breakout. When I believe, Grant, let's give it a few more minutes before people come back into the room to wait for
Sure.
people.
And until then, we'll enjoy this much younger picture of myself.
Would you like to contribute a new picture, Grant?
Grant, you haven't changed.
No.
This is the one on the website, so just one we have on file.
Yep.
Well, as soon as I can take a decent current picture of myself, I'd be happy to share that. I just haven't been successful in doing that yet.
Okay. All right, shall we go ahead and get started? We'll let people join as they filter back in. I would like to, as Jeff says, one of the goals of G2MC is to make people look younger. Yes, let's work on that technology.
We need a work group around that. Yeah.
We do. I would like to welcome Grant Wood and Dr. Theodora Katsila to provide an update on the Family History Working Group and their activities and goals for moving forward. Grant and
Fantastic.
Theodora.
So, yeah, thank you, Teiji, for introducing us. And we had a great, just like everybody else, I think so far has talked about having wonderful breakout sessions. We did also, and we're excited to share with you what happened and what we're working in 2021. So we'll go to the next slide and look at our agenda here really quick. We, like other folks, we had presentations from young investigators who had an interest in working with Family Health History Group, and Theodora's going to cover those presentations. I'm going to cover what has, I think, become maybe the heart of our activities that will be at least in the first half of 2021, and that is a possible pilot with a family history app called MyGene. Dr. Shane Quinones from University of Michigan has developed this and is willing to share it. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. We've been asked to take over some activities around cancer risk, especially those that can utilize family health history as providing a risk assessment around cancer risk in families. And so Theodora will cover that issue. And then I'll talk a little bit more about our activities that we've been doing on the website and our next steps with that. And then we'll finish off with talking about collaboration and other goals for 2021. So we'll go to the next slide and we'll start with the Young Investigator presentations and Theodora.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you all for joining us and listening to what we have actually to share with you today. So starting with the young investigators presentations, we had some previous communication with the guys, and we agreed that this meeting is a great opportunity for them to present to us their project ideas, their know-hows, their needs, and their local needs even, together with their vision of how this can actually be part of our family health history flagship project. That said, the interest has been according to their needs, of course, along the same lines, and we were happy to see that, and we were happy to see that the whole concept and framework of what we were thinking actually match such needs. And starting with the idea from Peter James Abad, coming from the Philippines, and having already some prior work and experience, especially in capacity building for nurses, and in particular for oncology nurses. He has already started there an online genetics course for health professionals and nurses in particular, always under and upon emphasis on family health history perspectives, needs, materials, platforms, and how this can be actually used, how the family health history component can be used as a toolbox for prevention and knowledge-based, evidence-based practices in their setting. So there was a live discussion in between us and the other members of the group, and also with Peter. And actually, the two main questions that came up is how much do people know about their family health history information, and how people communicate such information. So again, this is not like a set stone, but what we have said, and also from our interaction with the others, that we are going to follow up. We're not going to be limited, if any, via our monthly meetings, but we're going to follow up with Peter as well as with the other young investigator ideas, so that we can see how and if other members are interested in reinforcing such efforts, and how actually we can help them, and how they can be helped, and vice versa, how this interaction is going to be put forward in the context of 2021. So we were happy to discuss Peter's ideas, and following up, if we can go to the second slide, please. Thank you. Pratiksha, coming from Nepal, she's a clinician, and her interest is more towards chronic diseases and their prevalence in the local population. And Pratiksha actually thinks of this project and her involvement in the G2MC family as an opportunity to explore how diabetes or CVD or stroke, or even breast and ovarian cancer disease prevalences can be related, if so, with the family health history tool. So there are some studies, and she knows a lot about, especially the population she wants to explore further. She has a very good grasp of the current knowledge. She knows the needs. She has also moved forward towards a situation assessment, what is needed, what is currently ongoing, how family health history can be implemented. Is it in terms of electronic health records? Is it in the form of a paperwork? All these are not really abstract questions, but she has made the best of her efforts, so that she has a plan and she knows what is going on at the population, at the clinic nowadays, and what she was gonna do, and what she wants to put into the table basically is how a family health history risk assessment tool can be developed, always, at least for her perspective, with the emphasis in the objective of chronic diseases, especially diabetes and cardiovascular disease, without, of course, having such limitations, but it seems that in terms of disease prevalence, these are the clinical phenotypes that they matter most. And that said, I think kind of sum up what we have been discussing with these two, and I think I gave you a flavor of the current situation and also what we have been going on, at least with the participation of the young investigators and us. We had a list with Grant of what activities those investigators could actually go for, but we thought that if we have it as an interactive platform, this can be of best value to all. And I think this summarizes more or less what I had to say at this moment, at least. So Grant, if you like, I think next is the project from Dr. Quinones.
Yeah, so it was great that we heard from Pratiksha and Peter, and as Theodora said, they both had very clear ideas of where they wanted to go, and this was great because this gives us as a group an opportunity to really move forward with some projects with them. Then we had something that made it even a little bit more interesting. Dr. Shane Quinones is at the University of Michigan, and he some years ago decided that he wanted to create a family history tool that would run both online and offline on devices, and then try them out in areas where they don't have those tools readily available and aren't part of standard of care. And so he's been doing some work both in Ethiopia and Ghana, mostly in Ethiopia, where they've provided some healthcare providers with this app on some devices, and the healthcare providers can collect family history information from patients on these devices, and they can do it initially offline, so they don't have to worry about a internet connection. While they're doing this, these device can collect and store the information. Then when they do have an internet connection, the app will then upload the data to a secure server that is at the University of Michigan. And so all of the data that the app collects is stored there, and then that's where they can actually do some analysis on that data. This app currently runs on Android devices only. As you may know, that Android is a platform that's a little bit more open than the Apple platform, and so that's why it is running on Android devices at the moment. But he has this app being used by doctors and nurses and even a genetic counselor in Ethiopia. They've been doing this for 3 or 4 years now. Shane has already published some of his experience in genetics and medicine in a paper that was published back in 2019. So this is an activity that is well established, has a lot of experience behind it, and Shane decided to participate with G2MC and shared with us this activity that he's doing. And then he went one step further. He said he'd love to be able to share this app with anybody else who might want to use it within the group. And this seemed to be perfect for the presentations that both Pratiksha and Peter just shared with us, that they seemed like they might be interested in discovering whether or not this app might be something that they could use. And I think beyond those two, I think there were other members within our breakout session who also wanted to know maybe this might be something that they could implement in their countries and in their locations and do a pilot with it. So it really became something very interesting for our group. We decided that this was going to be something that might be a pilot and an activity that would be kind of our higher priority for 2021. And even people on the breakout session call said, hey, can we, you know, as we look at the app, maybe give you ideas, you know, that might be some other improvements or updates to the app that we might want. So there's a lot of interest, and so where we are right now is we're actually working to put together. Hannah's helping us put together a follow-up call with those who want to demo the app in more detail, and we'll look at questions like, you know, what are the local needs of the person, and you might want to advance to the next slide. I can't remember if I had some of these on the next slide, some of these activities. Yeah, here we go. We're going to do a deep dive and just into the app and see, you know, if somebody's going to implement this in their location, you know, what exactly are the issues and barriers they'll need to overcome. So we're going to have calls devoted to these young investigator projects and really define them further and get to a point where we can actually launch the project. And this is a great opportunity for the family history flagship project to, you know, come together and work together and share knowledge and experience as these people participate in this pilot. We will at some point, as we discover exactly what we can and can't do here, create a more of a formal framework and project outline and all that type of thing. So that's why that's to be determined on that bullet there. But basically what we're going to be looking at is how to install this app, how to use it, and then how to analyze the use and data that we're collecting. And I just wanted to mention that we are, you know, we are still going to be open to using other family history tools. But right now, this MyGene app seems to have the really low barrier of entry, since Shane this is his own app and he can decide how to share it. So I'll stop there, but that's an exciting thing for us going forward. We'll move to the next slide.
Right. So at this slide, you can see a summary of what we discussed after our idea to put forward cancer risk as a case study or as an example of a pilot that can be actually considered under the efforts we make towards risk assessment and the use of family health history tools and risk assessment. And that said, we had a discussion and it's still ongoing, as we would like to ignite interest, but also see how the members of the group think and can see themselves or not in this project. So we are going to determine the scope and also see how this inclusion of cancer risk into family health history project goals can move forward. And that said, we discussed about family hereditary cases of cancer. So which data sets are we going to be interested, how this can be actually implemented. So we are going to focus on hereditary cancers or syndromes and comorbidities of disease phenotypes we know from our clinical experience or knowledge collaborators, etc., but also recent literature and data sets that we are all know and we are familiar with. So we have some disease cases in mind, like the ovarian and breast cancer syndrome, like rare disease phenotypes, like the Lee-Fraumeni syndrome that can promote oncogenesis. And we are gonna focus on the hereditary component and see how we can actually collect family health history data, either via pedigrees or questionnaires or what available software platforms there are out there. and see and define clearly before the launch of the project, if we can say so, which are going to be the clinical outcomes, which are going to be the endpoints. So if this project is going to be a successful endeavor, we need to really put a framework and define all the parameters that we're gonna look for in terms of sample sizes, in terms of which algorithms and how we can move forward. So we discussed that during our meeting, and we are gonna discuss that also at the monthly meeting that we have. And we will see how and which disease clinical phenotypes or local sites can be a priority compared to others. Of course, always being inclusive, but at the same time having at hand reality check, being that we cannot do everything. So we need to be clear with the questions and how we are going to seek the answers for such questions. And this actually, I think, or at least was my initiative when I put forward this slide, so that everyone here together with us, you'll know how and we're going to approach cancer risk assessment and the family health history component in that context. And I think, Grant, that this is pretty much at this point also.
Yes.
So yes, I ran a little bit before. So yes, thank you for the slides. So the next step that we're gonna, as I said, we're gonna focus on, we will schedule calls and prior the launch of the project with the people involved, and we are gonna even prioritize tasks to short-term, long-term goals and targets. And then we're going to see tool choices. And as MyGene has a low barrier already, maybe this is a case also, if people agree, that we can see also another case of implementing this app with these
Theodora,
patients.
May I interrupt 2 minutes, please?
Yes, yes, of course.
Yeah, since we just have a minute left, we're going to go through these remaining slides really fast. So next slide. This is just some information about, we're excited about what we've accomplished so far and on our website, and some ideas of more things that we're going to do, like blogs written by members, etc. Some more outreach to potential partners. Next slide. And we even have some long-term ideas about in a phase 2 that would go even further, like pages that would focus on family history and a specific maybe disease, like rare disease, infectious disease, or a page specific to family history and pharmacogenomics, and a lot of other really interesting things that are on this slide that we'll again get into later. Next slide. And we didn't really get a chance to talk about collaborating with other G2MC groups, but because we got excited about this pilot that we wanted to develop, we certainly are open for any further discussions. I think Alan talked about working with rare disease previously, so that's certainly an opportunity. Next slide. And this is just the last slide, but this basically is what our group is doing. We're going to figure out this pilot with MyGene, see where we can go with it, work further on that cancer risk assessment opportunity, and adding to the website. So that's our major activities for 2021. So thank you.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Theodora, for that excellent presentation, and also the ideas from the young investigators on the projects that are moving forward. I think we have maybe time for one question that was in the chat. Jeff asked, can you comment on how you are addressing the language barrier? Having family health history in multiple languages is desirable. So, and what can the G2MC help in this regard, or how can it help?
Yeah, so as we work with Shane in the MyGene pilot question, that's going to be one of the many questions we're going to have to address. And so we don't know exactly what our solution is there, but we probably will find that people will prefer to have the tool available in languages other than English. And so we'll be talking with Shane to see what we can do there. And that's something that, yes, we certainly want to solve that going forward, because that would, having a tool in a local language means that the tool would be more quicker and easily implemented and used. So we'll try to figure that out.
Okay, great, thank you. If there are any questions or comments, please do put them in the chat and we will collect them and respond back. And if you would like to participate in the Young Investigators project, please let Grant and Theodora know so they can work with you to move those forward. And I would also like to say that if there's any funding opportunities around these projects, we could look at those too, to develop the applications and write the proposals. So that could be fostered by the G2MC Secretariat. I'd like to move on to our next presentation, which is Dr. Mark Abramovitz, to present the evidence writing group, and also Dr. Fad Al-Molla to discuss their previous activities and also next steps in furthering the evidence development for genomic medicine implementation. Mark?
Thank you very much, TG. And I'm not sure if Fad is already here, so I may start. And as we are a little bit again back on time, I can have the first slide, please, already. About this evidence breakout session, we had a very, very good meeting last week, and several of the members of the group who were very contributive are present here today. So thank to them again. The next slide, please. I will go briefly. I think we can skip this one, which is exactly the same. And I'd like to remind the missions as we see them for our work group. One is to monitor the evidence of clinical utility of genomic medicine, and actively monitor emerging evidence over time and promote awareness about the evidence available to support genomic medicine. Then promote implementation with a special look on low and middle income countries. Next one, please. And the current scope that we chose is polygenic predisposition, not Mendelian, monofactorial, somatic, or pharmacogenetic. And I'm going to briefly summarize to you what we've been doing. We are now making a snapshot of the available evidence for polygenic predisposition, genomic medicine, clinical utility. We want to make a systematic review on this current evidence. Then we want to build a machine learning tool to update the evidence regularly. But then by doing that, our work group last week mentioned that evidence on monogenetic Mendelian also will need some catch up. And this is what I'm going to tell you in the next slides. So we have mainly been going on manual evidence search. And over the last month, it appeared that our previous review based on a string search was not optimal. So we've been working on a new type of review using mesh terms. This needed some adjustment with some professionals of searching. And this has been done mainly by Brittany Zick, whom I wish to acknowledge and thank very much. She's been instrumental in doing that and also in organizing the whole work group teamwork over the last month. And this mesh strategy has been going on, and we could trim the number of research we got from PubMed search to about 500 and not 5,000, which was practical enough to be distributed to members of the work group for manual curation. The next one, please. Next slide. This has been distributed to about 10 of us, and each of us have been reviewing 105 items. So this has been done in duplicate with clear criteria for inclusion, exclusion, and a special attention for the reason why we would exclude some apparent report of evidence One of the main reasons for that is that the evidence reported was evidence of clinical validity, but not of clinical utility, which is the goal that we pursue for genomic medicine. And so as a preview of what just came out last week is that out of the 530 papers or so, 6 seem to provide evidence of clinical utility, and they are now being reviewed to make sure if they do qualify or not. And these papers, along with some papers considered to be near evidence of clinical utility, will be used as seeding papers to develop a machine learning tool to update evidence on a regular basis. Next one, please. So the limitations of our work is that we decided to search PubMed only. We do not want to include gray literature or other databases because we think that the overlap between those databases is quite large and that PubMed is probably the best representation of peer-reviewed, clearly defined evidence as we try to find it. We will need to better define in our next manuscript clinical utility and health outcomes, and then get published. And then our next step will be to develop this machine learning tool to monitor evidence. And we had the chance that we've been lucky that Grant connected us with a group in Brisbane, Australia, at the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization. Our colleagues David Hansen and Beren Koopman, who have skills in doing that. And so now that we have seeding papers, we'll go back to them and clearly get this endeavor started to get this artificial intelligence machine learning tool prepared and ready. Next one, please. What we are now doing too is that we want to review PubMed by string search, focus on a few diseases: atrial fibrillation, type 2 diabetes, and coronary heart disease. And 3 of us, Judith, Bon, and MK, have volunteered to do that. So we will really make sure that we didn't miss anything out. We'll finalize the review and then get to the other goal that I just mentioned a few minutes ago, that during our discussion last week, it appeared that evidence for monofactorial, monogenetic disorders was not so obvious after all, for low and middle income countries, certainly, but also for the USA and Europe, and that it would make a lot of sense to collect this evidence and to display it so that it can be used to convince decision makers to use money for genomic medicine because of its utility. To do that, we'll have to keep all of us engaged in our work and get some additional volunteers beyond the ones that I have already named, and some of them, and the ones I didn't mention nominally, but to make it short, we'll need volunteers to do this job because Fad and I and Brittany can only go so far without additional help. Next slide, please. And from what I told you and from what you already heard, there are obvious areas of overlap with other work groups and ways to interact. We'll love the further help of the IT group to even better liaise with our colleagues in Brisbane, Australia for the machine learning tool. We also want to coordinate with George and his work on the review of pharmacogenomics. Clearly, we've been following the same intentions and guidelines to review the current evidence in both the fields. His group in pharmacogenomics, our group in polygenic risk scores and polygenic predisposition in general. We'll be very happy to coordinate with the education work group, that is to coordinate our efforts to promote awareness and any education initiative for implementation of guidelines. and guidelines is what we'd like to develop with the policy work group. And in that view, one idea was that we'd like to get some levels of labeling as A or B type tests to encourage insurers to refund and finance tests that have been demonstrated to be of clinical utility, including in polygenic risk scores. So that in a nutshell is our place today. I'm trying to keep half of my brain focused on the slide and the other half trying to read the discussion, but I cannot do that. So please skip
Mark,
to the next slide. Yeah.
Yeah, please don't pay attention to the chat until we can get to the end for discussion.
Please understand me. I have a Y chromosome. I'm unable to multitask. And so
Okay.
what we plan to do until next September is to have a clear division of writing tasks and responsibilities. And again, more volunteers and collaborators are welcome. We are the last leg of writing this systematic review. I think we are firmly grounded now. We liaise with the Brisbane colleagues. We'll submit for publication. And then we'd like to work on evidence-based guidelines for the monogenetic, which come back on the field. Then we'll collaborate, of course, with great pleasure with the other work groups. And I should include also, after hearing Alan today, with the rare diseases work group with enthusiasm. And then the last proposition that was mentioned last week was to review also ELSI, so the ethical, legal, and social issues of gene editing and genomic medicine in general in specific cultural contexts. For example, there's now considerations for gene therapy using CRISPR-Cas9 in the future for hemoglobinopathies. This probably makes a lot of sense, but they will have to be applied on the continent where these are especially prevalent. And so the ethical and legal aspects may be slightly different from the ones that seem too obvious to us in general in the United States or Europe. So these should also be addressed. And the last slide, please. That was it. So if it was the last slide, and if I'm on time, I'm going to rewind the discussion and see the questions that came out.
You are definitely on time, Mark. One of the comments was from Jeff. A good resource for the evidence group is a genome.gov link that Jeff has pasted into the chat.
Okay.
The next question actually was from me. Drilling down, when you're looking at your clinical utility, will you need to actually drill down to a country level too as the next step? So fostering, if you get a evidence for clinical utility that's widely applicable to the globe, how much more do you need to curate that for a particular country? And you would need to enlist people from that country to help you specify that, correct?
Yes, that's right. And certainly when we get to the point of guidelines and implementing guidelines and having them adjusted to the specific countries, then yes, it will have to be on that level.
Okay.
If I did understand your question,
yes.
Teji, or was it more subtle than that?
No, that was how do you take the current utility and apply it to the guidelines of that country, or figure out if you need to collect more research to be able to create the guidelines for that country for that particular gene drug pair or that genetic predisposition.
That's right. So I think there are two parts of the question now that I understand it better. One is that we are looking after evidence that a polygenic risk score will make a difference in patient outcomes. And that will depend on the best standards of care currently available. Now, I think that your question relates to the fact that the best healthcare standards depend on the income of the country, and the difference that the genomic test might do might be different considering those settings. So this is, I think, more ambitious than what we want to do now. We just, apparently evidence for clinical utility, not validity, but utility of polygenic risk scores is very scant at the most. What we'd like to have is to find it where it emerges, then monitor it, and then once we have something robust, to go on with guidelines to convince people that that will make a difference and save health and save money. And I think that after that, we may adjust to individual countries to see how we can do it better. But I would say that at presently, I see that as a secondary scope. It's not our primary aim. Again, I think I would like to bounce on your question to say that we call then for volunteers from specific countries to adjust that and make it better than our present aim to really engage it to specific countries.
Thank you. That does answer my question. One more comment from Jeff. Have you considered searching clinicaltrials.gov at the European equivalent for the trials that are developing genomic medicine evidence?
Yes, we've been doing that, and we've been doing that actually 2 years ago. We went into several trials that were a bit desynchronized. Some were stopped, some were ongoing. But the trial, in our view, was something that has to be followed, but was not to be included in our current review of demonstrated evidence. So I would say that this is this will be helpful to maintain the regular updates of the evidence. And this should be included in the machine learning tool with our Brisbane colleagues.
Thank you.
Jeff, does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks very much. That was great.
Okay, we are at time. Actually, we have a few more minutes that we can spare. Any other questions for Mark on his evidence writing group presentation? Okay. Thank you very much. If you do have any more comments, please put them into the chat and we will make sure that they are answered appropriately or captured. Our next presentation is from Dr. Patrinos from the University of Patras to present the pharmacogenetics working group and flagship project activities and next steps as we march towards the fall 2021 International Conference. George?
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Yeah, excellent. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. Before I start, let me say that I'm connected not via web, but via a landline because I couldn't get logged in. So apologize for any any issues we may have with moving the slides forward, backwards, and of course I'm not sure how we're going to deal with the concluding remarks. I'll do my best. So also like to thank your understanding for moving my presentation towards the end of this wrap-up session because I was getting my second shot of the SARS-CoV-2 virus today towards my immunity. So as Stagey said, I'm going to try to summarize what we have been chatting about in the pharmacogenomics working group. And as Mark also previously indicated, I think we should go to slide number 90, Hannah, if possible. So basically the concept here is that we're trying to report discrepancies in the existing guidance for genome-informed drug prescription. We all know that we have the regulatory bodies, the US FDA and the European Medicines Agency and the PMDA in Japan. All of those are issuing guidance. They're not issuing guidelines, they're issuing guidance about genome-informed drug prescription. And most of the times we have some significant discrepancies between the regulatory bodies. This situation is often enhanced by the fact that there are there are mainly two research networks. One is the CIPIC, the Clinical Pharmacogenomics Implementation Consortium, and the Dutch Pharmacogenomics Working Group from the Dutch Pharmacology Association that are curating guidelines and basically they are issuing those guidelines in the websites. The problem is that although these networks are issuing, they're issuing guidelines on suggestions on how to rationalize drug use, those are research projects in the sense that they don't have a guarantee sustainability, a guaranteed timeline. So that means that if funding is stopped, then the whole thing could fall flat. And such effort is discontinued. And the other major problem is that not everyone is aware of CIPIC. As a matter of fact, very few physicians in the US are aware of CIPIC. Everybody knows FDA, so this poses a significant barrier in smoothing implementation of pharmacogenomics into the clinic. So what we will try to do here as the Pharmacogenomics Working Group is to try to identify the discrepancies. Such work has been very adequately done by our group in a paper published last year, and also independently by Magnus Engelman Sundberg and Jesse Sven from Leiden. Those papers have been published early February 2020. So the problem is there, is identified, and since April we are trying to start rectifying the whole process by issuing consensus based on the existing evidence. And to this end, Stefania is currently leading this effort, and it's a very nice coincidence that Stefania is also a member of the Young Investigators Working Group, so her contribution would be pivotal in getting this done properly. The other important thing is that it coincided with Mark's and Fact's working group effort, so we felt that we could explore synergy here. And to this end, we discussed, as also Mark indicated, the collaboration between the Evidence Working Group as well as the kind offer from Grant in getting us in touch with this group in Australia to try to exploit an AI-based tool to gather the evidence properly, so that we could lead us to generate this consensus of the guideline. So if we can move to the next slide, number 91. So yes, as I mentioned, basically the possible barrier we have to face is a significant discrepancy between the regulatory bodies and the research consortia, and of course the problem that the research consortia do not have their viability, sustainability guaranteed. So something like this should be openly available for clinicians to follow, so that they can guide them into their genome-informed drug prescription. So if we go to slide number 92, please, Hannah. So basically, our idea is to use the AI-based tool that Mark is going to use for his own purposes to identify the literature that refers to specific drug-gene pairs. We can, as we know, there are several associations, but there are very, very few those that are considered to be clinically actionable. And based on the FDA and the EMA categorization, you have the ones that they are involve those genes that for which genetic testing is required, some others that is recommended, and some others that are for information only. So apparently we're going to focus on the first two categories, the ones that they also refer to as clinically actionable. And based on what it will be found in terms of evidence, as well as the existing guidance and guidelines, the difference between guidance and guidelines is that the guidance doesn't recommend a drug dose change, because this is not only based on the genetics, but is also based on environment, like nutrition, like liver function, and so on. This is all the different pieces of the puzzle that the clinicians are aware and take into consideration before they prescribe the dose. So this is how we're going to move on. This is the approach that we're going to follow. So in the next slide, Hannah, please, 93. Okay, thanks. So in principle, what we're going to, one important bottleneck, of course, is expression of interest. So we know that we have been discussing this in the past, especially after the Cape Town meeting. It's quite important that we get the hands-on from several members. We have already seen interest from, I think 10 or less, I'm not sure really exactly how many, from the ones that participated in the initial teleconference, I believe a few weeks ago. So, and this will be also facilitated by the participation of young investigators, because that's something that is really important. I believe that we'll be doing the first screening of the literature that is going to be identified through the AI-based tool. Yeah, if we go to the next slide, please, Hannah, 94. So basically, as I said, the usage of this particular IT-based tool is going to help us to screen the literature and identify those papers that are relevant to the drug gene pair we're going to select. And in slide 185 basically mentioned that our vision is that at least by September 2021, we aim to produce a report on the preliminary data we're going to collect, hopefully for one drug gene pair. And if we're lucky and we get enough members willing to tangibly participate, then we can have some interesting data to report, not only for one, but perhaps for more drug gene pairs. Let me say here that for every consensus going to be generated from a drug gene pair, it's going to be welcome for publication in TPJ. TPJ is the Pharmacogenomics Journal, it's the journal published by Spring and Nature, in which I'm also chief editor, and there has been some arrangements by the journal to prioritize publication of this consensus. Yeah, so that's basically it from my end. Don't know how well I did.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, any questions? Yeah.
Yep, there's actually one question in the chat, and I welcome others to put your questions in the chat also. George, the question is, can we leverage the Rare Disease Project to determine the pharmacogenomic alleles that are prevalent in the 14 countries participating, and see if there are novel PGX variants that could impact drugs used in those regions?
Okay, so 14 countries, meaning which countries? Are we talking about Europe? We're talking about worldwide?
George, this was a question I had. It's a little tangential from what you presented, but I was just thinking that Alan and Vajira have enlisted 14 groups around the world to participate in the Rare Disease Project, and I'm just wondering if, when the sequence information is obtained from those projects, could we actually look to see if there are novel variants in the PGX, relevant PGX genes that could actually be important for the way the drugs are handled in those populations?
Yeah, right. It's a very good point, Jeff. I think that those groups will actually, those patients will include whole exome sequencing data. So to this end, we will only be able to identify possible novel variants that are present on the exome. If we're talking about getting information indirectly by proxy, by doing imputation of data, then it's a wrong way of doing pharmacogenomics. So I would be delighted to see possible variants that they are found on the exons of the pharmacogenes We can decide on how many pharmacogens we can look at. We can go for 100, 231, depending on our decision. But it will be eventually restricted to the exons, which is fine, of course, but it's likely that we're going to miss some crucial information.
Okay, I just want to mention that Dr. Datta has volunteered to contribute to the drug gene pair effort, and he will be sending a message to Hannah if there's anybody else. One more question, or actually comment from Claudia. There will be SNP array data as well for the rare disease sequencing project. So that's something to keep in mind, George.
Sure, yes. I know it's from the GSA. Again, the GSA, it's performing pharmacogenomics by proxy. I've seen this in several papers. Clinical pharmacogeneticists are basically against using pharmacogenomic data generated by imputation, because there's no guarantee that the marker will be there. So nothing that can be clinically implemented could be deducted from indirect correlation. Unless, of course, some of the RS numbers, some of the SNPs, including the GSA, they correspond to pharmacogenomic biomarkers. In this case, of course, we're talking about direct genotyping, which is, of course, more than welcome to include.
Thank you. Judith has volunteered to help with the drug gene pair. Community. Thank you, Judith.
Mm-hmm.
And
Thanks,
Mindy Klein has offered up a good resource on pharmacogenomics, pharmgkb.org, which I believe we are all well aware of. But thank you, Mindy, for that reminder.
Thanks so much. Yes, actually, we would love to collaborate with PharmGKB. We threw bridges last year to PharmGKB and CIPIC. At that time, justification was that it's something that can never be done. So I'm very pleased that PharmGKB would be actually willing now to join efforts with what we have already actually started doing since May, actually April last year. So thank you so much.
Hi, George. I just want to say, first of all, thank you for a great presentation about the imputation a bit when we're integrating array data with the exome data. Because of the variation we have in Africa, we have imputation services that are catered for or have greater reference data of African genomes. So we might probably want to identify and do a comparative analysis of which impute services for which subpopulation would be best based on where the samples come from when we get the array data, if that makes sense.
Yeah, again, as I said, Judith, I'm really opposed of using imputation data for pharmacogenomics, even for research, because this may be misleading. We've seen that in several papers published. This is something now that it's not even followed in the new era of TPJ. So we're only looking for direct genotyping, especially when it comes to clinical implementation, something to be discouraged. So comparison is one thing, but then we have to be certain that the way that the data have been generated has to be consistent. So if we're talking about generated data by proxy, then we have to be very cautious, let's say.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments or questions for Dr. Petrinos? We have a few more minutes. If not, then we could go into our closing remarks and next steps. And I'd like to introduce again Dr. Petrinos as the co-chair of one of the co-chairs of G2MC to conclude our virtual session of our breakouts.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say here because I basically got logged in 40 minutes ago, as I just said. So I'll try to wrap up things, based on my role as co-chair of the G2MC. It's really interesting to see the progress that the working groups have made. It's, I think, the first time that we have managed to have some actual suggestions for projects that we have been discussing now for a while, and it's nice to see that those projects are now taking shape, and some of those are actually advanced to a more or lesser extent. I'm particularly pleased to see the one led by Vajira and Alan, and thanks to the generosity of Alan offering the in-kind support from Regeneron, from RGC, to perform the whole exon and array genotyping of the samples. So basically, it shows that at least G2MC is now starting to take off in terms of activities. It has already done so based on the participation of the IHEC project, and I really feel that based on what we discussed here, we're going to have a lot of things to present as preliminary data in the meeting of September. One crucial point here is to demonstrate that we can effectively engage young investigators. And the way we can effectively engage them is to provide something in return, kind of fellowship, kind of short-term training opportunity in one of our centers, especially the ones that they are located in centers of excellence, most likely in the US or in Europe. We are trying as G2MC leadership to try to identify ways of those young investigators will get something in return for the volunteer work. It's also a way that we ourselves would be helpful to this particular effort. By trying to encouraging young investigators to participate in what we are trying to create here. So it looks like it's going to be a very promising year. We have actually 7 months in front of us, or 8, to try to get something done according to what we have been discussing these last couple of weeks and what we summarized today. So I really look forward to the subsequent calls. To get this going, the help this end of Hannah, Brittany, Meredith, and of course coordinated by Teji. Hope I haven't forgotten anyone. Teji, sorry if I did.
No, they're
from
the
your
main
team.
players.
Okay. Great.
Yes.
I think it's to be, commended. We really feel that we couldn't do this without your valuable assistance. It's really nice to work with Jeff and Catalina being the co-chairs of the G2MC. We cover a broad geographical distribution, so many members. And I really feel that by September we may have an even, in fact, broader participation to the meeting we're going to put together. Yeah, not sure what else I can say.
And thank you, George. And I can also add a few closing remarks. We will be taking the slides and the next steps and adding those to a report out that we will distribute on the website, and we hope that you will be able to disseminate the next steps for each of the working groups among your groups and encourage young investigators to engage and participate, and also your colleagues. Would also like to remind you that our next international conference, unfortunately, will be in virtual setting. Due to COVID, and that will be in September. We are working to restructure the meeting so it can be attended virtually, so we can get a larger participation, as George mentioned. We will also convene people more frequently and which would lower our costs, but also allow you to participate because it doesn't require you to travel. However, saying that is, we are really hoping to be able to have a in-person meeting in the next few years where we can bring everybody together and really have the proper interactions and the proper mentorship of our young investigators from face-to-face interactions and discussions, which that helps move things forward. But until we get to that point, we will be meeting virtually. We will hopefully convene our working groups on a more consistent basis so we can actually move things forward and have more engagement. And in order to do that, we would love your ideas and your participation to move these forward for individuals to spearhead particular projects with our support and mentorship. We'd also like to establish working group, basically a consistent working group schedule for each of the working groups to convene, and we'll be able to post those on the website so you can see when they actually are convening and being able to participate in them. Jeff and George, have I missed anything?
Well, I think not. From my end, at least, Jeff?
Nope.
Did I miss?
As I said in the chat, I think this was a fantastic meeting. You all are doing very impressive work and really look forward to continued progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that concludes our mid-year virtual meeting. We will be letting you know more information about the international conference coming up. We have a planning committee meeting tomorrow to discuss restructuring and bringing in new sessions to that meeting based on the fact that we are now virtual and we can spread it out over a little bit more of a longer period of time for your engagement. Thank you, Hannah and Meredith and Brittany, who's not on, and the rest of the Secretariat who are participating behind the scenes. All right. Thank you very much. We hope to see you shortly in the future.
Great.
Thank you. Bye.